Hey, welcome to the Fuel the Fight podcast. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Nick Behringer. Another episode, another great guest. I sound like a broken record. What can I say? We just have awesome people to talk to, and we have a very, very awesome person today, Mr. Nate Palin, the COO of the initiative, knows all things tactical strength and conditioning. We'll learn about that and talk a little bit about his history. But Nate, despite the technical difficulties that we just fought through, thanks so much for joining us on your phone.
Yeah, absolutely. I adapt and overcome. So here we are.
Adapt and overcome. I love it. So what I like to talk to, especially folks I have on who, have either had this uniform on or have worn it, is can you tell us your Army story?
Yeah, I'll keep it brief. I like to say, long time since removed and only getting longer, if I'm being honest. And I've kind of, I've actually done a lot to not take that with me. Some successfully, some less so. But I will say, as of recently, and maybe that's why I had the hat as a little bit of evidence, but I'm trying to lean in a little bit more to it. I think that I've maybe because I feel more comfortable, confident in kind of the human health and performance space, to where I think that can stand by itself. And so I'm a little less hesitant to bring where I came from, kind of into the conversation, where in the past, shoot in DC, for example, I was introduced one time as, like, oh, Nate, he was a Ranger, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, don't do that. Don't do that. I want to be coach and, kind of establish that side of the house prior to digging into the other. But, brief version is 7 or so years in 2nd Ranger Battalion, a little bit of a break in service there. So 99 to 03, went to Butler University for 3 years, where I discovered that I didn't want to work in marketing. Guess what? Right now I do a lot of marketing. And then I rejoined for another 3. And then bounced out again, kind of ready to start the family thing, decided maybe the military wasn't the best setting for me to try to accomplish that, at least with what I was doing at the time. And I didn't really want to do anything else. And that's what led me into sort of the accidental discovery of the coaching profession.
No, that's awesome. And I love that kind of perspective, and having known you for a few years, you don't always, now looking back on it, you don't always lead with the 275 story. I obviously know it's there, but it's interesting to kind of establish that first. You want to be a coach, and then now working particularly with the tactical athletes, that's obviously an area of street cred. Let's just put it that way, right? Whenever you're working with those tactical athletes, having that background, yes, you're a great strength coach, but the fact that you've done some of the things similar to what that population might be working with, I'm sure kind of helps bridge that gap.
I think the biggest thing it does is it just makes me comfortable in the space. You can see it when coaches come from other settings who don't necessarily have tactical backgrounds, and they step into the weight room or whatever the facility is. And there's an immediate kind of discomfort for them because they're foreign to that, and it's foreign to them. Whereas for me, I felt very comfortable there, and I think that is the real advantage. We like to say, and we meaning myself and Vernon, something we had discussed is that empathy has a shelf life. So if I pretend that my past is their present, I could actually overstep my bounds, and now the fact that I was a Ranger could be a disadvantage. Because I'm kind of confusing the two. Like, look, those worlds move fast. They've evolved significantly. And it's important for me coming in as a coach to not pretend that I know what their reality is, but to work to understand it as if I've never been in that setting. So again, I think take that comfort with you, but kind of leave some of your history and some of your uniform, and definitely leave your rank. What's kind of wild is the reason that discussion came up between myself and Vernon is I've seen time and time again where coaches who are veterans really fail to establish rapport in the space. And part of that reason is that they haven't established themselves as a coach, or they're not willing to open themselves up to the idea that maybe the folks they're working with have a different reality than they had experienced in whatever setting they were in years prior.
Wow. No, I love that. Empathy has a shelf life, and yeah, and I could see. I never thought of it from that angle. You really opened my eyes to that. Is it could be a bit of a trap in terms of, you think, okay, I know what a Ranger does. I know what the 82nd does because I was with them for 10 years. And now everything's changed, and you're kind of now that out of touch coach, talking to these individuals. So no, I think that's great advice, particularly for some of the folks working in holistic health and fitness. But before we dive into that, I want to talk about the initiative. Can you talk a bit about the initiative and what its mission?
Yeah, what I'll do? I'll read the mission statement. Since it is written, why not read it? And then I'll kind of give my interpretation of it, I guess. So mission statement would be to empower tactical professionals to enhance their physical and psychological health and performance through a collaborative collective of unrivaled practitioners. So obviously a mouthful, super official. To me, what the initiative really is us accounting for reality and taking idealistic concepts, boiling them down as much as possible to what somebody actually needs to be able to consume to move the needle. It came as a result of both places I've been and others in the setting that, quite honestly, we feel, and I know we're going to get to the FM 7-22 potential discussion, but they talk up here, and it's an idea of, I taught them, and so I checked that box, but you might have taught them, but what did they actually learn? And so what, the feeling is we're trying to teach them 100 things. They're walking away with 5. What if we teach them 10 and they walked away with all 10? And what if we gave them the no BS, what they need to know, as opposed to this is what I learned, this is the traditional dogma, this is the why is the science why. Like, no, the why is why should they care? Like, let's start there. And so that's the idea behind the initiative, and then the collective that contributes, which we really hope to grow immensely over time, and really hope to pull back, myself and Vernon, so we're less the face of it, and we can create a stage for others to contribute. That collective, it's not just a matter of like, are they an SME? It's more, are they an SME who has, recent hot term, cultural competence? And so do they feel comfortable communicating with the audience? A great example is Annette Zapp delivers, incredible information on sleep through one of our courses for fire and rescue personnel. Are there people on the planet who are more versed in sleep? Absolutely. And when we talk to people, they're like, oh, you should grab so-and-so and you should grab so-and-so. And my question is, do they work with fire and rescue personnel? Can they talk the talk? Can they walk the walk? Can they show up comfortably in any given fire station on any given day of the week? Because if they can't, then that's not necessarily who we want delivering the information, because guess what? We don't need to deliver this information. We need to deliver this and hit them right here. So that's kind of the idea behind part of the initiative anyway.
No, that's great. And I love that analogy and the cultural competency, and agree with everything you're saying. It doesn't, I think we all had those professors in college. I use that example, who were, or instructors anywhere, really, really smart, not the best at communicating concepts, Yeah. So no, I like that. Now, you've served, as we talked about, in 275. So you served in special operations, kind of at the start where the human performance initiatives in the military were really born, with the Ranger Athlete Warrior program, with the Thor 3. Can you compare and contrast what you've seen to what you're seeing in holistic health and fitness currently?
Yeah, so when I was never exposed to Thor 3. That came literally right after I got out, which was great timing for me in my career move. But what I did see was Ranger Athlete Warrior. Now, the problem was twofold, and again, it'll leak into our 722 discussion. But the problem was, one, like, looking back in hindsight, right message, wrong messengers. So for our unit, for example, as a physical therapist delivering that message, right? Like, we look at that, and I've said this before on another podcast, but like, we looked at that as a med guy. And like, what is a med guy going to tell me about how to be a better, physical specimen? And And so it just kind of honestly fell on deaf ears, and it was delivered through, and very much injury prevention, and that stuff might resonate with certain levels of leadership. It definitely might resonate with people who pull, financial purse strings and worry a lot about availability of soldiers, et cetera. But for us, like, availability really wasn't an issue. We wanted to talk performance. The other side of it was, the other way that I was exposed to it was through our internal, like, NCO development course that we would do. And so same thing there, like, the joke was that raw is nothing but running. And the raw instructors, or whoever is trying to communicate that message, would say, hey, raw is not like, we're trying to get away from these long runs all the time, trying to get trained smarter, et cetera. But we didn't have the experts to modify. We didn't have the facilities or the equipment to support all these other components of the raw program. So what parts do? We did runs. So it's like, well, we added in some hill runs and some interval runs and maybe a little bit of plyometrics and a smarter warm up. But outside of that, like, we weren't touching med balls, we weren't touching weights, we weren't, and if we had the right professionals who were able to translate raw into our reality, we might have been a lot more willing to grab a hold of it.
No, and that's great, and I'm glad you shared that, because talking to some folks, there's some struggles with H2F, with those units, those initial struggles. And they look at, like, raw or Thor 3 as a model, and it's like, there were struggles there too. So it's good to remind it. Yeah. I'm like, no, there was times, so it's always a challenge breaking into the culture. Speaking of that, the culture, you hit on that, and you've spoken a lot about this. I've heard your talks in the past at the National Strength and Conditioning Association and other kind of podcasts. What are some positive things you're currently seeing about the current fitness culture with holistic health and fitness before we dive into maybe some of the challenges?
Yeah, I think that's one of the major, say that question again, actually, because I think I was going straight to part two.
Okay. So what are the some of the positive things you're
Yes.
seeing with the current fitness culture in holistic health and fitness?
Yeah, I think the most positive piece is just the raising of awareness, right? That there are other components to fitness beyond the APFT, for example. So even the ACFT in itself, while obviously imperfect, or maybe not obviously, depends on your viewpoint, but huge step in the right direction, because of what it starts to say is there are other components of physicality that are important. Now, going beyond the test and looking at H2F in its entirety, now what you're saying is, yeah, those components of physicality are also only one of 5 pillars. And so, sleep, mentality, nutrition, spirituality, these other components are also extremely important. And so let's start to put a little bit more weight behind them. And by the way, there's also an interdependence of all of them. So I think the awareness piece is massive, and kind of can't be, we probably underappreciate it because we all want more, because we know better, because we live and breathe this stuff. But if we're looking at, an everyday soldier and even an old school leader, a lot of this is still going to be new and news to them. So we kind of have to appreciate that awareness evolution.
No, so yeah, it's definitely changed the culture, and as you alluded to, and we'll talk about that a little more, is the ACFT is definitely an improvement, but we're gonna dig into that. With the positives, what have you seen the biggest kind of challenges to regard to the fitness culture currently going on?
Yeah, it's funny. So you mentioned the NSCA presentations, and the first one I ever gave was on evolving the culture of military strength and conditioning. But quite honestly, it was very much through the lens of special operations, both my experience and then the experience of coaches who have really come in to be a big contributing factor. The difference there, though, is what you were evolving was from a very physical culture to still a very physical culture. You were really just changing the way that they went about business, trying to bring in a little bit more, understanding for movement competency, strength and power, recovery, and things like that. Versus with H2F, you're really trying to light a fire under a culture that right now is probably lacking general physicality. And so rather than it just be, hey, they already care, we just need to give them better direction, a lot don't even necessarily care. And so you're starting in a very, very different place than you were with something like a Thor 3 when it kicked off.
No, that's great, and I had never really even thought of it in that context. In terms of, yeah, you know, when we showed up with Raw, Rangers were already super fit. When we left, they were already super fit. You know, it's just a different.
Yeah.
Maybe hopefully a few you know, less injuries, less you know, suspicious supplement choices, or you know, we left it better. We left it better. Yeah, we left it better than we found it. But at the end of the day, it was a high performance organization when we got there, and it was, you know, when we left. Whereas maybe with some of these units, not so much. And so you have that.
I'll say this, Nick. I want to make sure to say this, that one thing that H2F, back to positives, right? If we look at, like, let's say it started with Raw within Rangers, and now it's called PODIF, right? Like now it's Preservation of the Force and Family, or maybe it's HPW or something, but it has a big wellness component to it, and it looks beyond the soldier. And so it truly is starting to get holistic. So they started through the human performance route, and they kind of realized over time that performance really wasn't on a foundation of good health and wellness. And so now they're starting to address that. Whereas H2F came out of the gate addressing a lot of those things, which makes it harder because it's so broad. But, you know, if you can elevate every piece 1% versus, hey, we got a 25% improvement in these high performance specific lanes, you know, I would argue that that's actually a better move collectively for the force. So I think H2F is starting in a better place with regard to the idea of truly being, you know, overused term, holistic.
No, yeah, they've already had kind of their broad pillars in place for that foundation, which, is you know said, it can make it difficult, especially when you talk about spirituality and some of the more kind of, you know, squishier topics versus like strength and conditioning. Did you lift more weights? Did you run faster? You know, did you get injured? The metrics over here definitely more challenging. You know, how do you change that culture to make people care? How do you go about that, or how would you recommend it?
I mean, that is the question right now, and I can't pretend that I have an answer that I think is good enough. I will say this, that I think we all know now, you know, Dan Bornstein has certainly pushed it enough, and certainly popularizing the concept that the state of physicality of youth in the United States, in the country in general, right, is a national defense crisis. And so no matter what we say on the military front, we're already way downstream. And so I think the real solution lies somewhere much, much further upstream. And that's a massive answer that I don't have, you know, I don't have that smoking gun right now. I certainly hope there's a lot of smart people working on it, and I certainly hope we all find it. But on the other side of it is, in talking to actually Chris Frankel the other day, we were talking about this, like what can we do? And I think just insanely consistent micro touch points from as early as we can possibly reach somebody on through the entirety of their career. You know as well as I do, the Army loves to do, we do nothing, we do nothing, we do nothing, we do nothing. We do a week of marksmanship, 25 hours a day. And then we do nothing, we do nothing, we do nothing, and then we do a week of, you know, or you go to a 2-week course and you're a master of something. And I think that's part of the problem, is if we take that same approach to holistic health and fitness, we're going to miss, you know, and instead it needs to be like, this matters in microdoses at every opportunity. From, you know, in basic training, we don't need to do a 2-hour block on sleep hygiene. You need to have a 2-minute brief every night prior to going to sleep about, hey, here's what you can do for yourself right now. And that kind of speaks back to that idea behind, again, the initiative, is that we just think we're trying to teach everybody as if we're making them a micro version of ourselves as a coach or a dietitian or wherever we are, as opposed to saying like, no, you're still just a soldier. Let's start with just empowering you. And heck, not even empowering. Let's back it up. Let's start with directing you on how to do better physically, how to do better, you know, mentally, spiritually, etc.
No, all strong advice. I like the micro touches and yeah, kind of not waiting the night before to study for the test mentality.
And then forget it as soon as you pass, right?
Right.
Like, look, the moment I left Pathfinder, I never used any of that ever again. Most of what you learn as a jump master, with the exception of JMPI, you learn on the job. It's yet I'm a master because I attended that 2-week course. And I think part of it too is you get out into the civilian world and you get exposed to people who are truly masters of their craft, and you get humbled very, very quickly, and you realize, like, okay, I wasn't really a master. Like, and you don't necessarily need to be. You need to be a master of mediocrity, right? Like, and that's okay. So maybe we stop, like, maybe we remove that term, because in itself it kind of creates this like inauthentic situation. Like, someone comes back from a course, we expect them to be a master, but everybody knows better and they know that they're really not. And then so nobody respects them at all. Versus if, like, let's say we called them I don't know, an influencer or whatever it is, like, now you have somebody there who can provide some sort of information, but you're not trying to hold them to some standard that's just kind of absurd for a 2-3 week course.
No, I like that. Yeah. A master after 2 or 3 weeks.
Mm-hmm. Well, and for example, that MFT should not be the first person telling people within their company about these concepts, right? They should be reinforcing concepts that people have been exposed to from recruiting onward. I mean, heck, from physical education in schools onward.
No, and I definitely am hopeful. I've followed, Dan Bornstein's work, as you mentioned, and, even historically with, JFK and the programming they did in the schools in the 60s, and looking at that and kind of what that developed, that's probably the route, eventually we're going to need to go, because, once you get an 18-year-old who's never trained at all in their life in the middle, it's really hard to kind of, turn them into a master soldier, if you will, in 10 weeks, right? If they have no training history.
Yeah, I mean, I know Alex Morrow talks about that, like, you've got the same meat grinder you always had. It didn't used to hurt so many people. And so that means we've got different meat coming in, right? And so we either need to address the meat, which means getting prior to them actually enlisting, well prior, or you need to change the meat grinder. And like what's under the Army's immediate control is changing the meat grinder. So let's start there. Actually worth asking you, because on that same topic, something I always bring up is starting basic training at 145 pounds, and I finished basic training at 145 pounds, and that's obviously a major issue. And I think Joellen Septon, they did some research through Auburn about calorie consumption in basic training, basically showed that they're undernourished, just looking from a macronutrient standpoint. And did the Army change anything?
So
I don't know I know they hadn't. I don't know if they have since, with the exception of you could purchase protein shakes from drill sergeants.
No, yeah, I'm not familiar enough with that. I know the research you're talking about, and it essentially showed, I think they gave them additional energy from carbohydrates, additional energy from protein, and they tracked injury rates, et cetera. And what they found was just additional calories. It didn't matter whether it was coming from carbohydrates or protein, were a benefit. I know Usarium has done some stuff with giving soldiers snack bars and additional calories and to help. So I know Combat Feeding is looking at, the Moore's ration, in terms of plussing up those rations and plussing up that energy. So I know that's being done out into the field. To what level? I'm kind of in the ivory tower now, so I'll have to ask and see.
But hey, you've got the reach. I know you can ask around.
Yeah. I'll have to ask around to kind of see what's going on the ground. But I mean, that is a great point of, we talk about all these supplements, pills, and potions and super soldiers, when really sometimes it's just getting soldiers a few more calories throughout the training day is really what could have the biggest impact.
And policy adjustment. I mean, it costs nothing to adjust policy, and that's, I think, what drives me kind of crazy is, like you said, we want to talk about these super soldier concepts, And how about we take care of the basics? And to take care of the basics, it doesn't even necessarily mean a whole bunch of money. We already know what right looks like. There's plenty of people looking into that. You just named several. And so instead, are we going to actually make some policy adjustments based on all of these findings?
No, you're right on. We talked about the ACFT. What are your thoughts on the new ACFT?
So when you say new, do you mean the new standards, or do you mean the ACFT compared to the APFT?
Both. You can talk about both if you like, or you can just take it as a one angle.
I'm going to start the very positive route, which is, look, ACFT is looking at components of physicality that were never looked at or appreciated before. Obviously, it's tail wagging the dog. You shouldn't really lead with the test, but we also know that sometimes that works well with something as big as the military. And so it's raising awareness of those other pieces like we talked about earlier. Two, it's putting some sort of level of accountability on your actual development of those pieces. And the military is starting to put more assets into place to help people have some guidance on, what direction, how to train, I guess, better for that new test. So I think that's by far the positive of the ACFT. We could be here all day if we want to break it down by individual event. So I won't do that, but to touch on the negative, and I think the biggest thing is this is, and a lot of people have heard me say this recently, but you have two types of tests essentially, right? One is like, can you do the job or not? And the other is, let's evaluate all the components that support the job. And where I think it becomes a poor test, no matter the correlation to the job, where it's a poor test is when it lands somewhere in the middle. And so it's a watered down version of both. And what I mean by that is, again, so we'll go right to it. The leg tuck is a perfect example, even though it's gone. I think it's worth talking about it because actually sprint, drag, carry we could also use, but it's just more complicated because there's so much going on. But leg tuck, too many things going on at one time, right? If somebody fails a leg tuck, we don't really know why. I love to use the example of like a rope climb within an obstacle course. If someone can't climb the rope, what's the reason? Well, it could be because they have poor body composition and they can't move all that mass up the rope. It could be they lack skill because there's a component of skill to climbing a rope. It could be that they lack upper body strength. It could be that there's countless. They could have small hands, right? Like you never know. They could be pre-fatigued from jumping over a wall and sprinting 400 meters or whatever else preceded it. And so it could be a conditioning component. And so if you want to use the rope climb as part of a job test, well then fine, it's pass fail, they can or they can't. But if you want to use it to try to evaluate underlying physical qualities that you can then enhance, it doesn't give you enough information. You'd have to do additional tests. So same thing with something like the leg tuck, even like sprint, drag, carry, is if you can't do a leg tuck, why? Well, it could be an upper body strength component, it could be anterior core, it could be mobility, it could be body composition, it could be, it could be other physical conditions that you might have that could, be obstacles to you being able to accomplish that. And so it makes it a poor test. But that said, back to what I prefer to value, because, honestly, like I can't talk science, but what I can talk is practicality and practically speaking, and to tie it back to our culture concept, what the leg tuck was really assessing was, did this soldier care enough to invest in their training to the point where they're able to complete a leg tuck? Because with very, very few exceptions, and only some that would have to have a medical condition of some sort attached to them, there's not a person on this planet that we couldn't train to do a leg tuck, given enough time and resources. And so, again, with regard to the test, to me, the test has cultural implications that far exceed its validity as an actual physical assessment.
No, I like that. I got what you're throwing down. I never thought of it that angle until you had highlighted that. So thank you. What about, kind of going along with that, the new FM7-22? Anything what do you think of it? Anything you change, add, anything they missed maybe?
I think it's 244 pages. So I don't think anything could possibly be missed within 244 pages.
Fair enough.
So I'll say this. I think it's excessive. So I think you're trying to be everything, and when you try to be everything, you end up being nothing. And so I think there's just too much in there. I will say that there's some surprising parts, like some of the descriptors of physicality and even how they kind of separate it from religiosity. I don't think I've ever said that word out loud, religiosity. Now I'm going to say it twice. Like I thought that was actually really well done. But one thing that was very obvious, very fast was it was like physicality, and then the other parts were like a lot smaller. And it started to get into like all these specifics and all these details and the example workouts. And it's just like, it's better than the old, which was just like this giant list of exercises almost. And so it's a little better than that because it does hit some of your like principles and elements and some of your bigger concepts. But I think if you hand that to a leader, they're not going to know what to do with it. And so again, it kind of goes back to my early point of, we're trying to teach people 100 things and they walk away with 5. Like, let's teach them 10 and have them walk away with all 10. I think something like that needs to be condensed. Or I think what needs to happen is sort of 2 versions. One is a reference version, so it's somewhere you can go to get that information if you need it. But the other is a no BS, here's what you need to know right now in this moment as a leader version. And like, I've actually posted it today, this quote right here: the success or failure of the H2F system depends upon the quality of its leadership. And that's right out of 7-22. And then it also follows that up by saying leadership will be held accountable. And to me, like, that's kind of all that matters. Because again, if we're talking about, we need to start with getting people to care, because we have a whole lot of information in there that nobody's going to access because nobody cares. And look, I was just at the H2F National Guard event, which was a phenomenal event. But one thing that became very clear very quickly is that there is still leadership who are in denial that, 1, the ACFT is truly a test of record, and 2, that H2F is actually where the Army is moving and that it's here to stay. And they're just kind of hiding out, waiting for it to go away. They're not accepting that responsibility. They're not taking that accountability. Also, I forget her name, but from the Center for Initial Military Training from the H2F side of the house, presented these 16 marks, right? That these are the things that they're being evaluated on. And my question to her was, who's responsible for this? And she was like, well, we are. And I said, you can't be responsible for this. You are a training, you create training, you create doctrine, you can help push good information out there, but you can't hold anybody's feet to the fire. Who is responsible for this? And that's part of why I went hunting for that information within 7-22. Because to me, that's what matters, and that's where it's either going to be successful or it's not. Is, are we holding leadership accountable to the readiness of their unit, and are we evaluating in some way how willing they are to use H2F assets? Because just like Thor 3, these are voluntary assets, right? Right now, there's nothing mandatory in place that says you have to go see the strength coach. You have to, and in fact, if there was, you would overwhelm them because there's not enough of them to account for all the soldiers that need them, right? So a long-winded answer, but maybe because it's a long-winded manual.
No, that's great, and I love the quote, and yeah, it's all these concepts are great. As you stated, this is, everybody is trying to do the right thing, and that's important, and that's the positive. The challenge is when it comes to the execution, it's going to be those commanders on the ground that really control how those H2F units get utilized, if they do get utilized, and then do they make it a priority to assess their formation using whatever those data points or those metrics to make it a priority. Because if they do, it'll become a priority. But if they don't, it's going to be just like everything else, kind of a, as you were saying, potentially like a check the box sort of thing, and not really change the culture.
Well, I think part of it too is like, let's start with evaluating the process and make sure we are evaluating the process. And again, another Dan Bornsteinism, but if we're just looking at outcomes, we're not going to know how we got there if we're not looking at what's actually happening to drive those outcomes. And I think too, in the beginning, like, success is that there's even process occurring. So maybe we start there instead of worrying about like, oh, what's the outcome? Like, look, Army, you better commit 20, 50 years to this initiative if you really want to see it succeed, because this is a major, major overhaul. And if you're looking at like the 2-year mark, the 3-year mark, the 4-year mark, and you're looking for injury reductions, and like, you're not going to find it. You're not going to find it unless you skew the data somehow in your favor. And it's because this kind of change takes a long, long time. If nothing else, it at least takes a life cycle of a soldier who was exposed to this from prior to ever enlisting all the way through until they are the most senior leader they can possibly be. So I don't know how long your senior generals are in, but let's say 40 years. So like, you got to give it at least 40 years. It's kind of like if a college coach takes over a team and they get fired after 2 years and they're like, I haven't even had my team yet for my 4 years. I think very similar with H2F.
No, that's another great point. Some folks listening might be a little disappointed to hear that, but it is true. Yeah, if you have a culture that's done something, one way or a particular way for 40, 50 years, you can't completely change it and in 2 years expect that, everything to kind of go this other direction. It is going to kind of take a life cycle. But I think it also, where that's a positive message is in terms of patience and, celebrating those little wins that you do get and just understanding that it's going to take time.
Yeah, I mean, I think you nailed it. Like, celebrate the little wins. They are meaningful, especially if you're able to replicate them across the entire force. You don't need to increase squat numbers 25%, but if you increase everybody's sleep by 10%, like, that could be monumental. No,
100%. Nate, where can folks find you if they want to, more of your information and where you kind of share these thoughts?
I mean, at this point, I hope I'm almost tough to avoid, but definitely on LinkedIn. So Nate Palin on LinkedIn is where I tend to share a little bit more long form. Maybe I put it in quotes, professional opinions. We put some short doses out on Instagram through the Strategic Initiative is the Instagram handle. thestrategicinitiative.com would be the website. And, the company is also linked on LinkedIn, but typically we'll post it in both places. And then even my Instagram, Nate Palin, will have some stronger language sometimes than maybe the company account does. But yeah, that's plenty of places to find me.
The Instagram, you're conjuring up the old 275 Ranger a little bit more. No.
Yeah. I'd say that's probably accurate. And eventually you will see us on TikTok, if I'm being honest. That's where the soldiers are, and unfortunately, a lot of the government entities can't be on there, and so they have great content. Champ's a great example. They've got some phenomenal content that is not landing on anybody's ears because it's not on the right platform. They're just not allowed to be there. So our hope is maybe we can pick up some of that slack and again, microdoses in a way that's consumed. It's not about what you told them. It's about what they actually are able to consume and internalize.
Awesome. Any book recommendations?
Oh man, all the book recommendations. So I usually have 3 books going at a time, not because I'm smart, but because I have short attention span probably. And so I'll give 3 recommendations maybe. They're not the 3 I have going right now necessarily, but one that I've recommended a lot in the last year and I recommend to any leader is called Fearless Organization. I want to say it's Amy Edmondson. And the idea behind that book is psychological safety. But that said, if you say psychological safety to a group of tactical professionals, they're going to picture people, hiding from the world. And so we prefer to use the word candor. And so really what it's about is creating an environment for candor and how that lends itself to being a more successful organization. And it's based on a lot of her research, but it's written in a way that's super consumable and very relevant to any leader. So highly recommend that. The book that I kind of have recommended, I have 2 books that I recommend all the time. And so the one I'll recommend here is Talk Like Ted for anybody who is giving any presentation of any kind. And I think it also will lend itself, it ties very tightly into some of our FM 7-22 discussion and other ways of education. and let's call it Army PowerPoint slides, which have an average of how many words on them. And so I think it will help people realize that in delivering a message, if you want them to walk away, actually A, knowing anything you just told them, and B, wanting to seek more information, then there's a better way to go about it. Stop checking the box by throwing a bunch of words on PowerPoint. So again, that's Talk Like TED. And then one that I am reading right now is called Resilient. There's a long subtitle and I don't know it. Rick Hansen, though, is the author, and it's soft. I'll say it's soft. But for anybody who's looking to kind of do a better version of stress management for themselves and kind of better understand even the stress of others that they work with, or people who are kind of uncomfortable on that mental, emotional, spiritual pillar, for example, on the H2F front, I would say any strength coach, especially, I think those folks would be doing themselves really good service by reading this book, because I think it'll help them understand some of the kind of the evidence based approaches to, resilience on the mental emotional front.
No, that's great, and I got them all down. I'll be sure to put them in the notes. Fearless Organization, Talk Like TED, and Resilience.
Yep.
Nate, thank you so much for coming on and working through the challenges with me. Always enjoy talking to you. The only thing I enjoy more is actually seeing you in person and maybe catching a workout, which we'll have to do at some point in the future.
Let's absolutely figure out a way to make that happen. So I would guess we're going to find ourselves in the same place at the same time at some point, and you can humble me with your, I don't remember how much weight you had on that pull-up, but it was ridiculous, my friend. I don't know if the people listening know, but you are strong.
I'm getting old now, so I got to be careful, but thanks for that. I appreciate it. Nate, always enjoy it. Have a great day, my friend, and talk soon.
Absolutely, Nick. Thank you.
All right. That's all we have for today. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Tune in next time for another awesome guest.